Okay, here we go. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to the session today. My name is Bruce Pollock. I'll be the moderator for today's session. And we're very pleased to welcome Maurice Beattie, who's going to be talking about the development of the Kettle Valley Railway, which is in the interior of British Columbia. Just by way of a short introduction, Maurice's primary philatelic interests are mail that is related to the development of the CPR through British Columbia, and particularly the Crow's Nest Pass route, which ran through southern BC from Alberta down to Vancouver. He's also very interested in mail related to the mining activity along the coast of BC, including the steamship lines that serviced these operations up and down the coast. Apart from his collecting activities, he's also the editor of the British Columbia Postal History newsletter, which is one of the study groups on BNAPs, and he also is interested in collecting minerals. So I am going to, we will pause for questions at the end if you'd like to ask Maurice any questions, so we'll try to keep an eye on the clock to make sure we have time to do that. So I'm going to stop my sharing and invite Maurice to take over.
Okay. There we go.
Excellent.
All right, we're underway. Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for everyone online for taking the time to participate today. As Bruce indicated, I'm going to talk about the Kettle Valley Railway, sort of what drove its development, and just take basically a ride along the train and see how we go. I've got a couple of references that I'll post out here. One is in the newsletter, the BC newsletter in 2010 and 2011. Post offices of the Kettle Valley were written up in detail, including postmasters and all that stuff. So I'm not repeating that detail, it's there. The other reference is Grace Grimger's postal development of the Nicola and Similkameen valleys. It's on the Victoria Stamps website. That's an excellent, and I've done my best that I don't just repeat what Gray presented, because it really is a very good presentation. So if you're interested in this region, I encourage you to go look up both of those. The timeline, we're looking at the Nicola branch, 1905 to 1907, followed by another extension from Merritt to Brookmere in 1908. And then the main line from Hope all the way across to Midway was 1910, 1916. A couple of branch lines going south. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. It's mainly in this area that I'll talk about today. Now, the Kettle Valley Railway development was not a matter of starting at one end and just sort of building a line. It was cobbled together with all sorts of stuff. And this is from Barry Sanford's excellent book, McCulloch's Wonder, about the railway. There was a lot of charters given that never went anywhere. There was other charters that came and went. Also, this railway ties into the rest of the Crow's Nest route. So there was a lot of corporations that one way or another had a role in the development of the Kettle Valley Railway. First section we'll look at is from Spence's Bridge to Nicola, which became the Nicola branch of the Kettle Valley Railway. Now, as Bruce indicated, we're in southern BC. The Fraser River is running down here with both the CPR and CNR running beside them. Spence's Bridge, the first section of the railway we'll look at is from Spence's Bridge to Nicola through here, and then other sections as we go along. Now, the driving force for putting the railway in from Spence's Bridge was coal, plain and simple. It was not some altruistic desire to have a railway here. The CPR realized it needed coal, and it also became aware that there was coal down here in the Merritt area. So this line being put in, made total sense, and that became the first one. And for this particular branch, leased by the CPR in 1905, and there was the Nicola Kamloops Milkameen line leased from Merritt in 1905. Grading work started by June. January of the next year, the track laying, government approval for operation later that year, and by early the next year, they're running freight. Now, try to imagine that happening nowadays. It would take you 10 years of public hearings and discussions and whatnot just to get permission to start anything. And here, within sort of a year and a half, you go from, okay, we've got a charter, let's start running trains. Obviously, mail was being moved around in the Nicola Valley in this area. So again, we're talking along the stretch of rail here. And before the Kettle Valley Railway came in, mail was carried a couple of times a week. Barnard's Caribou Express carried it. And the CPR, of course, took over along the river eventually, but this mail was going quite well. The Kamloops post office opened in 1870. So there's been mail here for 30 some odd years before the railway came in. Just an example, I mean, this is typical. 1882 cover, Kamloops, Nicola Valley, via Spence's Bridge. And you look at the timing, Kamloops, September 10th, Spence's Bridge, September 13th. Not bad. Things moved along reasonably well if you had the timing right. Matched up with the horses. Another one here. This is a form from Nicola Lake to North Nicola. Nicola Spit Ring, October 2nd. Kootley, it's further down the line, you've seen a sec, October 3rd. So again, you know, people knew when the mail carrier came through, and when they took advantage of that, moved fairly well. This one was mailed in July the 12th and got to Nicola Lake July 19th, and then to Kootley July 20th. So sometimes things took a little longer. This is from Pryor, who of course was a big going concern in Kamloops, addressed to Mammoth Lake. And just out of interest, I got this from the estate of Alex Price, and he noted on the back of this cover was given to me about 1970 by good friend Ed Veal, an old-time rancher, and he met him in Kamloops. He knew Chartrand, the addressee, who gave him the cover. Ed filed his covers on board hooks, that's why there's a hole in it. I sold my squared circle collection in '84. Ed died in 1986, and then he got it back by sale. So, you know, just a little, I always enjoy the personal history behind covers if you can find out. Anyway, Nicola Lake one day, Kootley the next day. And again, Archie Parkland, Kootley, Nicola Post Office. Now this one is mailed in Victoria on the 8th, and it got to Kootley on the 13th. So that, you know, before the railway, that was not unusual because it had to get up to somewhere up the canyon and then be carried across, or all the way up to Kamloops in this case on the 10th, which only took 2 days, Victoria there, and then another 3 days before it managed to work its way down to Kootley. Now, looking at the Nicola Lake, which became Nicola Post Office revenue, is very interesting compared to the arrival of the railway. So post office opens here, and there's some growth. And in here, things start to heat up in this area. Becomes a money order office. Of course, then the revenues for the post office increase. There's a little bit of activity, and then things slow down a bit. And all of a sudden, it was slowly going up. And then the railway arrived in 1906, 1907. And all of a sudden, everybody was speculating that this was going to be the hub for the KVR in this region. And so land speculation went wild and everybody's going crazy. And then all of a sudden it became apparent that this wasn't going to be the hub for the railway. The hub was going to be at Merritt. And as soon as that happened, you see the revenues year by year just drop like crazy. Everybody's basically leaving town and moving down to Merritt. And we'll see the impact on Merritt in a minute. But I just find it interesting. You can look at the post office revenues and it correlates so well with what was going on relative to the railway. Okay, so we're going to start the ride at Spence's Bridge. Now, it had been opened in 1886 and then reopened 72. This is just, like I say, just a placeholder so that I got some place to start. Nothing special about this one. Coming down the line towards Merritt, come to Dot. Now, Dot was a very small station. Revenue is about $200 per year. And that's how it got its name. It was a very small station, Dot. This one was sent from Dot to Canford. Ed wasn't at Canford, so it got redirected to Merritt. And again, not bad. Mailed in the 4th, got there in the 6th. Further down the line, Canford. Now, Canford's a flag station, and at Canford, they supplied a lot of the railway ties for the railway. The actual Canford mill was actually about 2 miles north of Canford, and there is a separate marking for Canford Mill. The Canford station, where the main line for the KVR is coming through, you see, I mean, this is the section house and a bunkhouse. So pretty basic accommodation for the people working along the line. Now, this postcard was mailed in 1908, but you can see they've reversed, made it 80 instead of 08. Again, further down the line, Lower Nicola, 35 miles. It opened and received mail twice weekly. So this was being carried by stagecoach back and forth a couple of times a week. Now, the registered cover mailed July 12th to Lower Nicola, from Lower Nicola, sorry, to San Francisco. And it received a Calgary and Vancouver marking westbound on the 13th, okay? Vancouver on the 13th as well, and San Francisco 17 and 18. Now, even though this was mailed along the KVR, there was no mail car service on the KVR. After 1916, there was something called the Kettle Valley Express. I'll come to that in a sec. But you know, basically, you got the mail somehow to the main line for the CPR, and it got a marking and got whistled down to Vancouver. Mamet Lake, a branch line went from here to Lower Nicola, and early settlers included these guys. Post office open. This was really small. This was a post office that was really established to service these people who were in the area. So you see revenues of less than $50 a year right through till 1921. And the postmasters were the people who lived there. This is one of these water cards and signed by Wilfred Grenville. So the guy's wife, who was obviously helping out in the area as well, as is typical for these early days. Down to Kootley, 3 miles west of Merritt, and it was named after the family there. Post office had been open early there. So it arrived pretty quick. 13th it's mailed, so, and it arrived the same day. Now, this railway, the Nicola, Kamloops and Smilk, which really is the KVR, the guy who owned this charter was Merritt, William Merritt. He was a smart old guy. So when the CPR came knocking, saying, we want to build this railway, he wouldn't sell it to them. And they tried a few times, they upped the price. In the end, they ended up leasing it. So it became part of the KVR. It never operated as this railway, really. Okay, we come to Merritt, and it named after William Merritt, obviously. Dated 1912, which this particular view predates the KVR by about 2 years. It arrived in 1906, became CPR sub. And remember I said before that as Nicola's revenues dropped, what happened? Merritt's revenues rapidly rose. So like I say, everybody left town and Nicola moved down to Merritt, and Merritt was doing just fine from the time that the railway arrived there. Middlesboro was located about a mile south of Merritt. This is where the coal actually was. It was completed in 1908, it became part of the Kettle Valley Railway, Middlesboro Collieries, registered covered to Ed Veal, and this name is very dominant in the region at that time. You'll see several more covers with his name on it. I always like to include postcards with my overall study. This is of the colliery itself, and they supplied the CPR with 225 tons per day for the main line and going east and on the boats. So, this was an important part of keeping the train running. Other than that, they'd have to bring coal all the way from the coast, from Dunsmuir operations on the coast, which they did at times in order to negotiate better rates for the coal. Just back up for a second. This one is a similar view of the colliery. Now, this is taken by Henry Priest, and he was working at the time in the Nicola News. You show him operating as a photographer. He decided to sell his business, at least this part of the business. He kept his studio, or sold the studio, to this fellow by the name of Hooper. And some of the other postcards in the region have Hooper's name on them. So it's, again, very interesting to follow, who's who and what they're doing. But as you can see, the colliery area was a pretty desolate looking area. There's a colliery in Non-Majelis. Just going to take a little diversion and look a little bit at the company itself, Kettle Valley Railway. So these are typical envelopes from the Kettle Valley. You can see the paper's pretty plain paper. They didn't do anything fancy. This one with this marking on it, that's for internal mail envelope. The railway made their headquarters in Penticton in 1910. So you get lots of covers from the railway in Penticton, and this one mailed from Penticton. Postcard showing the first locomotive to arrive in Penticton, the Kettle Valley postcard, 1912. Now, before the Kettle Valley Railway arrived, so this is mailed in Penticton going to Hamilton. So it mailed on the 3rd, it got carried over to the CPR main line, then again a C&V marking, which would take it, in this case, being an eastbound train. Ottawa and Fort William RPO, whoops, can't see that one, arrived in Hamilton February the 14th. So that took 11 days transit to get from Penticton to Hamilton. So this is before the train really had much of an influence in the region. Even here, this is in 1906. Again, going east from Penticton to the east, it took 8 days to get to Ottawa. And this is just, going from one train to another, trying to make connections and so on. A little bit more company background. James Warren, he was eventually he became the president and general manager at the Kettle Valley Railway. He'd had some background because he was involved with the trust company that supplied funds for the construction. And the letter, which I'm going to come to, indicates a delay in starting survey work as spring has been late arriving that year. So here's the letter itself. And he says right here, the spring has been unusually late in the Kettle Valley, and on that account, it's been difficult to get a surveyor to go up the river. So, although things went really quickly in terms of railway development in this region, at times there were delays. And another communication here to James Warren. The Kettle Valley was seeking approval to extend the line into Princeton at the time of this. This is in 1914. And so this is addressed to James Warren at the Kettle Valley Railway in Penticton. And coming, it's a government form, so it's free posted. And in here, you also see an Ottawa stamp and just the start of the free marking as well. And in terms of staff, some of the names, okay, here's Warren. We've seen some letters from him. This is McCulloch. So again, McCulloch's Wonder, as Barry called it. You know, he was the chief engineer. And this fella here, which unfortunately this picture is a little bit smudged, is Swift. And he was McCulloch's chief clerk. And they worked closely together. And so again, we find mail to Swift from the Penticton Board of Trade, 1929. And here's a letter to Swift from some relative in Redmond, Washington. And probably most people are familiar with these amazing trestles that they had to construct in order to get the railway through this area. It's steep, it's rugged, all sorts of canyons. And so unfortunately, these things by and large burned down in the fire we had a few summers ago. But at least we have the postcards to remember. They also had to do quite a few tunnels in order to not go crazy with excavation. So this is the Quintet tunnels. And just for the sake, take note of this great big concrete pillar here. And you see on the next slide, this is a cigarette card issued by Imperial Tobacco. And there's the pillar. So they did a pretty reasonable job of reproducing this thing. And just a company pass as well, 1931. But yeah, it's pretty cool that you could find things that are not strictly postal, but help overall story. The same tunnel, but looking from the other end, and just get an appreciation of how rugged a terrain this is to try and build a railway through. And so you see these multiple tunnels having to go through there and all those big trestle structures. And this was another one, you know, coming out of the hillside, you really have no choice. You got to put a bridge across this thing. And so the construction, and think about how quickly this was all done in a few years. Just amazing. A few envelopes, Kettle Valley Railway from Penticton, both mailed from Penticton, one to Toronto, the other to Merritt. These are not hard to find. So this is 1924. So by now the railway is in and running and everything's going fine. A large one. Now this is normally used for internal mail. You can see the RR mail underneath here, but this one was going to CPR in Calgary. So it was not internal. So somebody just stuck a stamp over it and away she goes. A big part of the CPR was tourism, the tourist trade. So they built in Penticton luxury hotel, the Inkala Hotel, and it was in 1911, opened in 1912, and it was there for a long time, finally demolished in 1981. So again, it pictures and covers, in this one in case, being mailed from Penticton to Windsor. Just a letter to Warren. This one from the manager of that hotel. He's requesting a pass for his wife. He wants to get her to Vancouver and back via Sycamoose. So why not? If you don't ask, you don't know. Okay, so we've made it to Merritt. Now we're going to continue Merritt to Brookmere. So this is down. 1908, the surveys. 1910, start construction. And then after that leads into the main line, which we'll look at a bit. So we're now, like I say, we've come down here. We've seen Nicola, Canfor, all these places. We've got to Merritt. So now we're just going down this line here. And there's not a lot along there. I mean, it's not that big a distance. So you come to Kingsvale, which is 14 miles south of Merritt, named after King. Railway reached in 1911. Post office opened a few years later. And just a note, if you see a green star on, that's what I use to remind me this is a post office that opened after the railway appeared. So the railways had an effect here. The Kingsvale strikes tend to not be great. So I've included a Kingsvale proof strike here as well. And I noticed that in Gray's presentation, yeah, it's the same thing. It's challenging to get a good Kingsvale cancel. Mailed January 15th from Yarrow through Merritt to Kingsvale. So went up Spence's Bridge by CPR, then across to Merritt and on to Kingsvale. So it only arrived 2 days later. So mail is now moving fairly well. You get down to Brookmere. I don't have anything really fantastic from Brookmere, but the post office again opened after the railway came. And this actually part of the line was part of the Great Northern Railway coming through here. And I'll come to that in a minute too. It'll show up again. So now we're going from Brookmere, heading down to Princeton. And as you see here, Great Northern Line is coming up this way, and it actually connected up through Princeton. And then this was the Great Northern Line. Along that line, we come to Blakeburn, which is the Coalmont Collieries. And again, this pretty good coal came from this region. It was established here in 1917. And the coal from Blakeburn, in order to get to the rail line, the grade between the line and the mine was 3%. So that's way too steep for a spur line. So they put in a tramway instead to bring the coal down to the train. Coalmont itself, post office opened in 1911. Now this one is kind of an interesting card because it's got Coalmont markings on it. Now it's mailed from Penticton. This is the council for Penticton to Coalmont, where it arrived here. Sent April 20th, and it traveled around a bit because he was up at Coalmont the night before. It went from Penticton all the way down to Vancouver, and then redirected to Coalmont on April 23rd. So 3 days to get down and back up. And it's got this straight line Vancouver receiver marking on it, which is kind of an interesting marking too. And again, Coalmont, a registered cover. And this was the post office in Coalmont, 1966. This was not a big place. If you've ever been to Coalmont, it's a speck of a place. But the railway went through there and the coal was significant. Tulameen, very close. And again, now this is the Great Northern Line, which we call the VV&E Railway. And CPR never owned this line. They actually just got running rights over it. So in order to connect everything together, they didn't always rely on building their own line. They did deals where they could in order to make the line come together. And you get Tulameen split ring and a CDS on cover. There's a view of the railway here. It's written at Tulameen, and it obviously was after 11 based on the stamp that's on the other side. And as I indicated, the CPR eventually obtained running rights over this line here at Tulameen. Okay, so we've come down Tulameen, heading down this way. Get to Princeton, and again, mail was being handled here a long time before the railway came in. So this one was being sent to Princeton from Toronto. The 10th in Toronto, 13th it made it to Kamloops. That's pretty good. Penticton. Then it went to Nicola Lake and finally down to Princeton. So the routing wasn't always logical here because Penticton's further south, Nicola Lake is back further north a little bit, and then back down to Princeton. So it was just a matter of how it went. I always like to say what it was driving development of the railway, and certainly, coal was there for a while. Copper also became big, so there was a lot of exploration for copper. And Golden Creek Mines, who I couldn't find anything out about, this probably had a company that had some claims and that never went anywhere. Okay, so from Princeton, now this is the VV&E line, the Great Northern Line down here. We're going to follow this line and say, well, okay, we're going to go from Princeton to Penticton. Now, all these dashed lines here were all different surveys that were done looking for a route. This is a really tough region to put a railway line through. The railways don't like steep grades. So a lot of times you'll see this rail, and I'll talk about that more when we get into the next section. follow what looks like a convoluted route, and that was just to avoid grade. So we're going to go up from Princeton up through Osprey Lake to Penticton. First thing is Osprey Lake. And this again was just a tough drawing of the ranch house, and that's where the post office was way back. Now, I've talked a bit about mining, coal mining, copper mining. The other thing that was a big deal in this area for the railway was ice mining. Both Osprey Lake and the Great Northern did it further south as well. In wintertime, they would cut trainloads, multiple trainloads full of ice in sawdust and ship it either to the Okanagan, in case of the KVR, or down to Washington State for the VV&E to use. This is before refrigeration was developed. And so this was being done just to get ice in order to keep the fruit and vegetables fresh as they shipped it. And like I say, this was literally hundreds of trainloads of ice that were shipped. Mazama to Karamias in 1937. So this is ranchers writing to polishers and the owner of an adjacent ranch. So from Mazama, it went down to Karamias. Well, he wasn't actually at Karamias, Similkameen, which is a little bit further up the line. You got that stamp there. And in fact, you can see went from Mazama to Princeton, same day, down to Karamias, and then up to Similkameen. This is a very attractive cover. I love this cover. So this is mailed from Mazama to Italy. So March 15th, Mazama, Nelson and Midway on the 19th, Medicine and Nelson the 20th. The next month, it's in Italy, in between arrived in Montreal. That's supposed to have a dash there. And finally Rome on April 22nd. Now it's got a couple of RPO markings. It's got the Nelson and Midway marking and the Medicine Hat and Nelson. As I indicated, there was no mail service on the Kettle Valley Railway. So it will have got the mail, and when it hit after Midway, it gets the Nelson and Midway marking, and then further along the Nelson, Medicine Hat, Nelson marking. Just a wonderful cover to track. So as I mentioned, the trains on the KVR route were a big deal, but it was steep, it was slow. And so at some point, they wanted to expedite the journey. So they put in a special express passenger service in 1919. And the only difference here is the number of stops between Hope and the seacoast was reduced. So it just basically, once it hit Hope, it just whistled along. So going west from Nelson to Vancouver, this was called the Kootenay Express. And the eastward return journey from the coast to Nelson was called the Kettle Valley Express. And these were the trains 11 and 12. And there's a lot of markings for trains 11 and 12 for the various RPOs. Again, just another card. Okay, we're now just north of Penticton, Summerland, and you see this amazing trestle over the thing with, this is actually train 12 eastbound going across. So Summerland Mail, again, Calgary and Vancouver RPO on December the 8th. This is eastbound. December 22nd, westbound. So it went from Summerland all the way across to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, unclaimed, and it came back. So it got a couple of rides on the train and eventually made it back. Quite a few days later, but probably sat around here for quite a while. And again, going from Penticton to Midway, for this last stretch here, there was a lot of surveys done looking for a route. And you say, well, if you're going from Midway to Penticton, you know, why wouldn't you go bingo up like this? And again, it's all grade. So they ended up actually, as you'll see in a sec, following the route that loops way up and around, because those were the best grades. It's a bit longer, but it ended up being faster for the train. So like I say, from Midway, go all the way up through Beaverville, Carmi, back up and around and down into Penticton. So Carmi, located north of Midway on the KVR, it's called Carmi because Dale, the second postmaster, was his former home in Illinois, so he just called it the same place. Not much imagination. The Carmi mine was located here, which, there's all sorts of little mines that came and went in these regions. Later on, of course, we had big mines in the nickel area. We had the Craigmont mine near Merritt, and nowadays you have the Highland Valley Copper Mine, which is huge, which is a little bit further north from here. Mailed from Carmi on the 12th. Carmi incoming, and again, mailed in Vancouver on the 7th, and arrived in Carmi on the 8th, and it made good use of the trains. But again, things weren't always straightforward. It hit train 11 and 12. So it went eastbound on train 12, and then westbound 11 to get back to where it actually wanted to go. So, and this was not unusual to see cover that maybe made it as far as Hope or Ruby Creek on the train, and then really only gets looked at once it's on the Nelson and Midway. And if it's going the wrong place, send it back. And this is an example. This is Carmi to Vancouver, 1944. And the reason I include this one, it's got an RPO marking the Ruby Creek in Vancouver. And you sort of say, well, if it's from Carmi, why the heck is it getting this marking? Ruby Creek was actually, even though, again, it was just a tiny place on the railway, a place where the mail that came out of Nicola Valley would go to Ruby Creek, and from there on down to Vancouver. So this is, like I say, not at all. In fact, in Gray's presentation, he also has a cover which shows a Ruby Creek in Vancouver RPO, followed by Nelson and Midway and Manhattan Nelson. So again, Ruby Creek was a significant point on this thing. And from there on down, it went down to Vancouver pretty quick. Okay, north of Kettle River is Rock Creek. Not much of a place, but named Rock Creek because it was filled with huge boulders in this area. Strikes, again, difficult to find a decent one. Kettle Valley itself, it's west of Midway. Post office opened in 1913, stayed open for a long time. Mailed October 6th, receiving a Vancouver blackout cancel October 8th. So from Kettle Valley to there, at this time, you're no longer looking at lengthy things that mail moved. This one I always get a kick out of because this is the post office saying, rather than sending postcards, it's quicker to telephone to send your message. I thought that was kind of weird why they're putting that message on there. I thought they'd want to promote more mail. And again, very rugged area. And you can imagine trying to construct a train through here. So Midway itself, midway between the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific, and it was the eastern point for the Kettle Valley Railway, and also the Great Northern. This is where it came up through here. Nice split ring council on that one. Now, writing on the reverse of this one indicates it was written at Midway to Germany. Canceled aboard CPR mail car. So this is an early one, 1897, as this one date here. Receiving the eastbound RY21, April the 5th, arriving in Germany on the April 22nd. So 17 days to get across at this time, which is early. Midway, lots of different markings. So you have a 1914 split ring, which is very large letters. In 1948, different split ring that's much smaller letters. And there's sawmills and all sorts of economic activity that justifies train travel through here. So at Greenwood to Vancouver by the Nelson Midway RPO, mailed from Greenwood to Vancouver, train 11, westbound, receiving had marking, which was in use for quite a long time. This one mailed in Grand Forks. So these are mailed to the east of Midway, both of them. They get on the RPO and they make it down to Vancouver, usually in pretty short order. So one last section to do is Brookmere to Hope. So we came down from Merritt to Brookmere. We've done all the lines this way. We're gonna have a quick look along here. Not a lot of post offices here, but they're all named, as you see, for Shakespeare characters, because McCulloch was a big fan of Shakespeare. So all the stops, all the railway stops were named after those. Mile 22 point, Coquihalla Pass, and again, one of these huge trestles being constructed in order to get the train across. Brodie is a non-post office station. I include this because it was addressed to Brodie. He was the agent in Vancouver and ended up having a train stop, named after him. Romeo, further down the line, it's another non-post office point, over 1916. So here we have mail coming into Romeo, and I managed to get this from Brian Plain. Thank you, Brian. Mailed in Berlin, Germany on April 11th. And believed that this Walter Schmidt was a railway worker at Romeo. And it's care of the Penticton CPR, transited Brookmere on the 16th. And of course, then there's no Romeo marking because there's no post office. But again, a wonderful example of mail coming through and getting through by means of the rail. Jessica, another one, and these are, again, a challenge to find councils from Jessica because these were such small places. Further down a bit more, Lear, this is not mine. This is courtesy of Greg Scrimger. Has it in his presentation. It's the only one I could find. Mailed at Lear on August 13th, and mailed by this person. They think it's the wife of George Brown, a section man. And finally, we get to Hope and Hope Station. The Hope Station marking is really faint on this thing. And again, this is 1909. So by now there is all sorts of train activity coming in through here. This was one of the branch lines that I mentioned heading off to the south. Copper Mountain's 9 miles south of there. This post office is interesting to include because it had 1919 to 1924, 1925 to 1936, and then 37. So it's just a matter of activity in terms of the copper. Price copper went up and down and things stopped operating off and on. But anyway, 1949, it was operating. This is in the last period, and so I have this covered. And I come to the end, not of only my presentation, but also the railway. As you know, I mean, the railway no longer runs through there. The tracks have mostly been burned. There was the Kettle Valley Steam Railway as a tourist attraction, but that's about it. It was an incredible railway with a lot of incredible stories while it was constructed and ran, but eventually it was gone, as am I.
Oh, thank you very much. That was terrific. And we're going to open things up for questions if people want to unmute their phone or their microphones. I will say for those of you who live elsewhere in Canada than not British Columbia, that the Kettle Valley Railway still exists in the form of wonderful biking trails all the way up much of that route that Morris was describing. I've done it a couple of times on bike. It's a lot of fun. So if you come to the Okanagan Valley, be sure to visit the grades on and run through all those tunnels. It's really cool to drive through that and across some of those bridges. So anyway, questions from anybody, please. Okay, Reg, go ahead.
Oh, I'd like to thank Morris very much for his presentation. I'll tell Gray on Monday morning when we have our Zoom chat, our weekly chat, that this presentation is available on the Royal YouTube site. And I know he's going to be quite familiar with what you spoke of, but he's always busy on Saturday. That's why he's not here.
So
Anyway,
I communicate with Gray regularly, so I'm
Yeah.
not offended by his lack of presence.
yeah. And I have one question. Um, I bought and sold books quite a bit in my career, and I still have a Vancouver Island Railroad by Robert Turner. Did, did you assist him with the publication of Steam on the Kettle Valley?
No, I didn't. I have it, but no. Sadly, that was done a little before I really got involved in this.
Well, that publication would just twin in with what you just did today.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, just a point of interest. My mailing address is McDonald's Corners, Ontario, a village of about 200, and is also the birthplace and growing up place of Andrew McCullough. And we had a bit of his residence at the time was down on the Mississippi River at the end of McCullough Road, which was in the early days. McCullough was, there were no road sign. It was just known as McCullough Road. And somebody, when they were putting in actual road signs, didn't like Andrew's, one of his descendants who lived there, bit of a drunk, who took logs down the Mississippi River as a foreman, and got them to put the sign up with the Irish spelling of McCullough. And it took about 7 years before we could muster enough local indignancy to get it changed to the correct spelling. And one of Andrew McCullough's ancestors before there was much transportation, was known for going to Perth every month to get books. And that would be today about a 25-minute drive in a car. So just a bit of local history, and I've come across a couple of copies of McCullough's Wonder, which is a great read. There was one of the stops I was looking for was there any mail from the McCullough post office? Or was there a post office in McCullough?
I've never come across any mail from there.
And there was another village along the rail, a stop there was named after his wife. I can't remember exactly, but might it have been Alice?
I'm not familiar with Alice either.
Okay, that is probably something else.
Right.
But anyway, nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else with a question?
Right there.
Yeah. Barry Sanford here.
Talk aloud, Barry.
Barry Sanford here.
Hi, Barry, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I'd just like to say McCullough is with a soft H, not a hard H. It's not McCulloch. It's McCullough. It's very often it's been a mistake made there. Much of the other material I quite enjoyed seeing. The price of copper was very much influenced by the war.
Right.
Big demand for copper, and of course, as soon as the war ended, the copper market collapsed. I'd like to say I'm not about to sue you for a violation of copyright for all the maps and
Great. Gratefully acknowledged, Barry.
Yes.
You graduated in engineering in 1971, right?
Yes.
You and I were in engineering at the same time. I remember you from second year. You went into civil and I went into mining. But I remember you from second year.
Another thing you mentioned about the ice harvesting, there's a little side bit there that in the years before refrigeration, it was very difficult to keep produce that would be
useful and have a reasonable shop life. So in the CPR dining cars, they always serve prunes for dessert, and it got so that the Canadian lexicon accepted it, the prunes, as being called CPR strawberries.
Okay.
Nice work. Good.
All right. Yes, thank you. I'm going to have to start to wind things down here, but I want to thank Morris very much for the presentation. It's always fascinating to learn about the history of that area because I drive through there quite regular, so I appreciate that. I'm going to now stop the recording.
Great.